Hello, everyone. Welcome to the premiere episode of Workhackers powered by Doki. This is a podcast series where we'll be having conversations with thought leaders from across the globe who are reinventing future of work. Whether you're leading a global team, building the next productivity tool, or just curious about how workplace is going to look like in the future, this is the right place. Today, we have with us Mark Cruth, who is the workplace coach at Atlassian. Let's go. So, yeah. Hello, Mark, and welcome to the first episode of Work Hackers, the podcast series. When we look at somebody like you, the first thing that comes to mind is you're a workplace coach. That is not a role that a lot of organizations have. So, could you, enlighten our audience what that basically entail? Uh,
Yeah, certainly. Great to be on. And, I'll tell you this. I think one of the things we've learned over maybe especially the last 5 years, is much of how we work in our organizations as teams of teams, and beyond, even leadership teams, is that some of the fundamental pieces of how we collaborate, things like, alignment on our goals, things like how do we find information, these things were really being done by accident. If I'm totally honest, they were being done by accident. We just happened to have that information. But then 5 years ago, we kind of fractured out, and we started realizing we weren't as connected as we needed to be. And so my role as one as this kind of modern work coach is one that has kind of come about to help go out there and help, you know, for us at Atlassian, our customers, but also even us internally, to help kind of remend some of those areas where it fractured, to go out there and find out, says, hey, how do we get back to some of the basics of good teamwork? Because again, a lot of it's been accidental. And so I think a lot of organizations are finding this almost like there's a tension in their organizations nowadays. And so having, because there's, whether it be an assumption of how we work, there's like, hey, we're going to go back to office because that's going to fix how we work. The thing is they have to be intentful with these ways of working. And if they're not, all of a sudden they're going to find themselves struggling, grasping at straws. And so having someone in this kind of role can be very beneficial. And many organizations will have like organizational coaches. They'll have, in software development, there were folks like agile coaches. For me, I think some of these roles were too pointed in particular parts of the organization. Agile coaches really focused more on your HR parts of the organization. You had agile coaches focused on technology. Thing is in most organizations, we work across organizations today. We don't stay in our little part of the world. If I'm in technology, I'm going to work with finance, I'm going to work with HR, I'm going to work with marketing. We need people who start looking across the entire organization. So that's something in kind of my role as a modern work coach. I help people learn how to do, and I love doing it.
that sounds very interesting, especially because you're also at the position where you are working both with the management and both with the employees. So coming to
And
the
it's amazing with management. The thing that I find a lot of times is if you don't work with management, if that is not a primary area, change is only surface level. Let's be 100% honest. Yes, grassroots are great, but unless leadership and management are willing to change, willing to model what good behavior looks like in terms of like ways of working, things like that, the things you do on a team level may only last as long as that leader of yours is willing to, really tolerate that way you're working. And if they want to change something, it changes. And so for me, that's why I'm a big advocate that, and I spend a lot of my times with leadership teams to help them learn how to do this. Because if they can learn how to do this, they can model it for their teams. And then those teams see that as almost they have the permission essentially to go and express their ways of working a little differently.
that sounds interesting. So you know, the pandemic actually opened up the discussions around hybrid work. Before that, it
Hmm.
was more about traditional models of accessing workspaces. But even then, at that point also, we've had this conversation earlier as well. Atlassian
Hmm.
had cracked this model of distributed work and working from anywhere. Atlassian has had the policy of employees could work from anywhere across the globe. So the role that you're handling in the organization is not tied to a location,
Hmm.
right?
Correct. Like
And
I'm out of the United States. But I'm not even near one of our offices. I'm
yeah,
actually in Detroit. Our offices are in different parts of the country, and so it was something we've embraced early on. Is where you work doesn't dictate necessarily how you work.
and today the return to office discussions, all these discussions, the major argument comes up that, we are unable to collaborate when we are working from home, when we are working remotely. And that is the reason that we want all the employees to come back to office full time. So
Hmm.
how did such a large organization, say $50 billion in business, 10,000 plus employees, how did you guys implement policies and changes in place so that it is a structured system from the beginning?
So yeah, so for us, so at the very beginning we launched a program, and it's still around. It's the thing that kind of governs and provides support for our kind of distributed work model. It's called Team Anywhere, and so Team Anywhere was launched in 2020, and the whole idea of it was to provide support. Enablement, is it like planning, whatever it is that a team needs to help them figure out how do they work when they're not together. And really what it came down to is becoming very explicit around the things that we need to do together and those things that we don't necessarily need to do together. I'm a big believer that I think in person collaboration time is incredibly valuable. It's something that enables teams to accelerate. But, and I think everybody out there will agree with this, is that if you're just trying to collaborate all the time, you never have time for deep work. You never have the time to actually go and actually do the actual hard work. Collaboration is designed to help unleash ideas, so that way we can each individually go out there and try to tackle them. And so for us, one of the things we've actually implemented as part of Team Anywhere to help our teams collaborate is a program called intentional togetherness. And that intentional togetherness program is designed to bring Atlassian teams together. So in person, a couple times a year, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, about once a quarter, we're trying on. And we've been doing this since 2022 at this point. And the whole premise of it is to, again, do those things that are hard to do when you're remote and when you're distributed. And so for us, we get together, we do some planning, we do some team building, we do things that, again, that are focused on doing things like building trust and relationships. Because once I have those trust and relationships, I can go into a remote distributed setting and it's much easier to collaborate. Now, just doing intentional togetherness doesn't solve the issue either. For me, it comes back down to being intentful with those practices that you follow as a team. One of the biggest things I find that when I look at those organizations that do have an RTO mandate, which again, every organization has the right to do it. I will never say they shouldn't do it, but I always question the premise of it and like what led to that. Because most of these organizations, especially going into coming into the pandemic, they started investing in tools. They started saying, "Well, we got to buy all these technology to help our teams collaborate when they're distributed." But the problem is the collaboration isn't a technology issue. It's a ways of working issue. And so they didn't actually focus in on helping people learn how to work together when they're not together. And so thus they're seeing this fracture, these silos. And so they're saying, "Hey, you got to come back to the office, collaborate." The thing is when they come back into the office, they're not actually collaborating any better, even when they're together. The problem is they didn't actually solve the right problem. For us, when we think about this, we have some very core practices that we followed at Atlassian. We actually published these in a free resource online called the Atlassian Team Playbook. So any of the listeners out there, you can go out there and check this out. Atlassian Team Playbook. It has 60 different things that we do and teaches around how we work. And some of the core ones for us that we think every team needs to do are things like build a working agreement. For us, working agreements are critical for distributed teams because they help teams figure out really how they want to make explicit assumptions around how they work. So often we make implicit assumptions. I assume you work a certain way because it's the way I work, and then thus we have a conflict when those things don't connect properly. But if we talk about it and we say, "Hey, we're going to be working distributed. You're in one part of the world, I'm in another part of the world," and we say, "Well, this is how I'm going to share." So for us, the working agreements are all about making those implicit assumptions around how we work. What I assume how you work, but I don't actually know, making those explicit and actually saying as a team, here's how we want to collaborate when we work from different parts of the world. Here's how we want to communicate. Here's the meetings and how we want to hold those. And for us, it's doing stuff like that makes it really easy for teams to work in a distributed model. A great example is my team. My team is distributed around the world. We've got myself in the United States. I've got my boss in Australia. I've got a team member in Germany. And so for us, as you can imagine, there's no good time overlap, but we collaborate a ton. And so one of the biggest things that we do is we actually wrote up a working agreement. One of the things in there, we says, hey, when we're working on something and we need support, what we're going to do is we're going to send each other Loom videos. So Loom is one of our products that we have that is all about doing asynchronous video recording and collaboration. And so that's what we do. Today, I just sent a Loom video to my team about some of the work I've been doing. And now I'm going to expect that when I get back up tomorrow morning, I'll actually have some comments, some feedback in there that will continue. That way I can continue working through that. And so for us, it's just about being explicit about those things. And I think that's what many organizations that are going back to office, again, there's nothing for me. I think there's value in being together. But if it's just to try to fix how you work, you're not actually fixing anything. So for me, that's why I think for us at Atlassian, we've been successful, especially as we've grown to nearly 16,000 people now. We've been successful because we've been so intentional with those ways of working.
Yeah. Like you said, that is a tremendous feat in terms of number of people from across locations. So what you're trying to say is every organization should be able to communicate the practices upfront and try to implement the same
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and
in
be
terms of
explicit about those practices and iterate
that
them and
that would
learn.
that would facilitate asynchronous communication in this case. You guys communicate in an async fashion, right? So when it comes to back to office arguments, the biggest setback to hybrid work or distributed work came last year when Amazon rolled back on its policies and wanted all of its employees to come back to office. So every team globally, this made a massive impact on all organizations and teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody who's building a tech company probably wants to become an Amazon of the future. So probably everyone will be thinking, what research did they do to figure out that okay, back to office is the way to go. So the question is simply, somebody who has closely worked with the co-founders of Atlassian. You've been working with Scott and Dominic and all that. So you have seen it from the top as well of such a large organization. So what do you think? Uh, did Amazon do the right thing in terms of strictly saying that back to office is the right way to go? Let's roll back to the traditional way, how it was pre-pandemic.
It's interesting because again, I'm not one to say someone did something wrong. Like that is, Amazon made a choice. And if you actually think about their business too, you think about the number of workers that they actually have. Most of their workers are actually factory or like warehouse and delivery workers that are out there in the world. A small subset of those workers represent technology and other parts of the organization. I am sure that there is some sort of reasoning they have to bring people back to the office, but I will say that but I'm not sure what that is. And so I will say that from Atlassian's perspective and what we do and what we focus in on is that we said, from people like Scott and Mike and the leaders of our organization, as we were making these calls, is we realized that one, there was savings from, even for us, real estate investments. So, we didn't, if people weren't in an office, we didn't necessarily have to support, we didn't need an office in the location. It also gave us the ability to redirect funds in a way that says, hey, instead of, for us, we're still building new offices, but for new offices, let's build them in ways and in places that allow us to create destinations for teams to come to. Like, for example, like our Austin office opened up a few years back, and its whole point was to allow teams to come together and have that intentional togetherness time. And so it was a reprioritization for us because, again, even for Mike and Scott, they realized that as they worked, it goes back to that modeling. They're like, we're working just fine in this distributed world. Why can't we all be doing this? And so for us, that's kind of been our perspective, is that we're going to continue to iterate and we're going to continue to learn new things. I think one of the issues that I probably see around places like Amazon is that they came across struggles and they didn't necessarily know what a new approach would be. And so they went back to what they knew. And I think a lot of organizations did that. They went back to what they knew. And so,
That would be a
that was
safer
the
bet, right?
office. What was that?
That would be a safer bet to go, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. That's the thing. If you're gambling and you're like, well, I knew it kind of worked before, but the biggest issue here is that when they're assuming all the variables were held in the same level that they were before they distributed. Problem is that many of their people distributed around the country, the world. And so now they said, hey, you got to come back to office. It becomes an issue where it's like, okay, now talent has this opportunity to say, do I want to go in? One, do I want to go to the office if I'm local, But if I'm not local, which many of these folks, that was the big issue, is that like, oh, I moved to Utah instead of, and from Seattle, I can't commute there. So I'd have to, lift up my family and go back to Seattle. They basically have to make a call on whether or not that's worth it. So that's the issue, is that although they said, oh, it's a safe bet, we understand what we were dealing with before, it really wasn't a safe bet, because the variables underneath in terms of where talent lived, how you distributed, things like that, were drastically different from before.
Probably one of the reasons that these organizations want to roll back is the lack of usage of collaborative tools.
Hmm.
Like, in the first phases of pandemic, Zoom actually mentioned that they saw explosive growth with their platform because everybody was forced to work remotely. So probably a large organization till that point never anticipated the necessity for a collaboration platform at that level. So, but then again, coming back to Atlassian's use cases, you guys have been in this space. You have built multiple collaborative platforms,
Mm-hmm.
Confluence, Jira, Trello, all that. So, how effectively can a very small organization utilize these platforms to hire globally?
Hmm. I think one of the
Because
things that,
attrition is a real issue, right?
say that again, that last part again, Kishore.
Because attrition is a real issue, and ability to find real talent globally, this opens up new opportunities there as well.
Well, one thing I'll say is I believe that most technology and most of these collaboration tools, over the last 5 years, have become very much a commodity. And what I mean by that is that, I can find another tool that does very similar things to the tools we have. Like, I could find an alternative to Jira or Confluence. I personally don't want to, but like, I could. The thing
You
that
should
I know,
have.
right? The thing that I look at is what differentiates this is that it's the application of said tools. And that's why when you saw, especially in the United States and across the world, there in 2020, at the end of 2022, going into 2023, when you saw that kind of contraction over the economy, you saw businesses, you saw the mass layoffs, all those sorts of things that were happening. One of the things that organizations were doing is they were trimming costs, and they were getting rid of tools or things like that. And to me, if you're just cutting tools at that point, it means you probably never intentionally brought them in at the beginning. They were
Yeah,
just they were something that you brought in because, oh, we needed to do this, and you realize, oh wait, is this actually part of how we do business? And one of the things we've seen with many organizations, of anything, they doubled down on their investment with Atlassian because they realized that they were using our tools very intentionally. That was where, business critical information was being housed. And it became something that says, all right, we need to consolidate down and actually focus in on a common way of working across the single platform. And so that's been very advantageous for us. But I do believe that whole aspect is huge when it comes down to using tools in a distributed world. It's like you have to be intentional about it. And I think one of the areas that I always I always like to joke about that, being, using Atlassian tools since 2009, I think is when I first got exposed to them. I can definitely say that in organizations I've worked at, that, Jira and Confluence can be implemented really well, but it can also be implemented really poorly. And it's that implementation really poorly that results in organizations kind of flailing when their teams start to distribute, because there's no intentional alignment on how they use those tools. The best organizations I found are the ones that where their administration teams are really looking at the tools as a way to govern essentially ways of working across the organization. They establish common templates, they establish common workflows, things like that, to say this is how we work, versus, sure, I'll add a new workflow for you, or I'll add another custom field for you. That's when you start seeing that fracturing. So for any organization that might be a small organization looking to start expanding and scaling, the biggest piece of feedback I always have for them is, say, get really intentional about how you think about scaling your tooling. Because if you just start rolling out tooling here and there, the tooling isn't actually going to help you. It's going to solve a little need here and a little need there, but it's not going to actually help you scale. If you approach it from the perspective of, this has got to be something that supports us at 500 people to 500,000 people, this is one of those things where we have to say, well, how do we embed our ways of working into this? How do I approach this first from a ways of working, and then say, cool, I aligned on that. Now I'll layer in the tooling to support that way of working. So I think that's the biggest thing I've seen with those companies that have been successful as they roll out and as they scale and they grow.
Yeah. Also, primary in the distributed environment, I believe tech companies have the largest scope there. Like we said in the
Hmm.
beginning, where logistics is involved or other businesses are involved, like banking, JP Morgan, and all that. They've
Hmm.
all said that they need some level of uh, back to office policies in place. They need some more in office time for their employees. They have those constraints in place. Whereas tech companies rather have the flexibility to look for distributed work models, getting globally and all that. That's the one of the when we come to the end of the podcast, I want to ask you something. Since you've been working across domains, across organizations, different sizes, and for years, how do you envision the future of work be in the coming 5 to 10 years with AI coming into picture,
Yeah.
AI taking up a lot of tasks in HR, in facilities management, Atlassian definitely has Rovo as well.
Hmm.
So, as a work coach, how do you envision the workplace will be in the coming years? So that was a question a
I
lot
think
of
the
people have.
AI aspect is a fascinating one, and one thing I'll say, and I'll stand by this one, is that if we just apply AI to try to make ourselves go faster, we actually won't be faster in the future. That's the thing. 5, 10 years, we'll still be running at roughly the same pace. And what I mean by this is that AI has presented to us a very lucrative opportunity for us to not just reimagine our technology, but actually reimagine how we work. And so I think the opportunity that we're seeing with companies who are becoming successful with AI, who are actually they're seeing benefits beyond the 1 hour a week that Google estimates that people save. The ones that are saving, 10x that are the ones that are actually looking at AI and saying, okay, what we can do here is actually look at what is the underlying processes that we have to do to actually complete our work. And like really, when you think about it, what are the value streams from idea to cash, and then looking at that, really spending time outlining those steps and thinking what here makes sense to go to an AI, automation, things like that, and what needs to maintain human hands. And when they do this, instead of just picking something they do today and say, "Oh, I'm going to apply AI to it," that's where the way teams work will drastically change. The way organizations work will drastically change, because I think a lot of people today are simply saving time by applying AI to something that may not even need to be done anyway. So you're applying AI to something that probably should never have been done to begin with. And so I think that's going to be a big thing that we see coming into the next 5, 10 years, is really reimagining how organizations actually produce value. And I think it goes back to things like that value stream mapping. I also am a big believer that I think the dynamics of teams will change dramatically. I think right now we saw this aspect where back in 2010 to about 2020, you had this aspect where we wanted cross-functional teams. One of these teams that had all the elements in them. But then as we were growing and getting, in years, we realized, man, these teams need to work with other teams. And so as cross-functional as you can be, you can't be that cross-functional. You still need these other teams to actually get work done. I think what we're going to be on the edge of entering into is really the true cross-functional team, in that I can give a product to a team and that team can own it cradle to grave. It can do all the elements because it is employing expertise from AI, it is bringing in automation, different things to help take care of issues that needed other teams to support it. And so I think you're going to see much more smaller and autonomous teams because of that, which is exciting. I think that's going to be something. I think one of the things you'll see with that, though, is you'll see organizations starting to contract a little bit because they're going to realize that these teams can be a lot more leaner. And so it's just going to give organizations, hopefully what it does is it gives organizations the opportunity to redeploy people into new kind of cross-functional teams to take on more opportunity in the market, because that's really what it's going to present to us.
That also will facilitate in more employee engagement as well,
Mm-hmm.
more visibility for the employees as well. Leaner teams means more input from the employees, and this whole
100%.
conversation about uh, are they being valued enough would make sense then. So basically, what you're trying to say is, like you discussed in stacking up of softwares, here also AI should be done where it is intently needed, right? So every organization should focus on adding software or adding AI to their system if at all it is needed.
Yes, and it
That is
comes
what you're
back
saying.
down to is being intentful with it. I've had an opportunity to talk with a lot of senior leaders across many different organizations and industries, and this is the biggest thing that they're struggling with is many of these organizations are going at AI and they're like, cool, we're implementing AI, and they're implementing it, and then they stop and they ask, okay, what is it going to do for us? And so you're putting the cart before the horse in that kind of case. It's like everyone says we got to do AI because if we don't, we're going to be behind. But if you don't actually
Yeah,
think
that
about how
FOMO
you
kicks
want to,
in.
yeah, right, exactly, FOMO. Everyone's like, oh, I got to do that.
Yeah,
But the problem is that if you don't come at it with an intentful, eye in terms of like, what is this actually there to support? It's not actually going to solve anything. It's going to be the same thing that we saw when everybody during the pandemic, when everyone bought a tool to say this is how we're going to support distributed work, but they didn't actually do the things needed to support distributed work, which were the underlying ways of working and focusing on how do we get people to collaborate. In AI, it's going to be what are the actual processes that we've got to look at, and what are the ways of working that support those, and then how do we reimagine those and then make the right pieces go faster with the help of AI.
yeah. So, like you said, in the post-pandemic, everybody started going to Zoom, and then they started complaining that nobody's turning up in the calls, or even in the calls, nobody's participating well enough. So what you're saying is, before you implement a Zoom strategy for your organization, you need to figure out if it is needed. If it is needed, how it should be done.
Exactly. And it's funny you say Zoom strategy. It's one of those, I've heard organizations start talking about, what's your AI strategy? And I'm like, AI isn't a strategy. Just like Zoom isn't a strategy. Zoom is a tool. AI is a tool. Your strategy is about your business and how your business works and like what is it trying to accomplish. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we'll find organizations we'll see that starting to kind of shake out over the next little bit is you're going to see those organizations that have an AI strategy start to struggle because they're just focused on trying to use the tool versus saying, well, what are we actually trying to accomplish and how do we apply that as a tool? Like it's like values and it's like mission and vision. A lot of people confuse those things. The thing is, if you don't know where you're trying to go, that vision, that mission, the things you do to get there won't actually get you anywhere. And that's what we're confusing AI with today, in my opinion.
Well, then probably they'll have to shop after they have the purpose.
There you go.
Otherwise,
And
they'll be
Atlassian's
like,
a great place to come check us out for that kind of stuff.
most definitely. Atlassian have a lot of tools, and it is going to grow in the coming years as well. You'll be facilitating distributed work across channels, across organizations. So, with that, let us wind up this conversation. When we publish this, I don't want this to have. This can go on for hours if we
Oh
let
yeah,
it
we
go.
could keep
Like
talking
we could
forever, Coach.
talk for hours about distributed work, about events, about practices, and all that, but then the audience would be terribly bored. So let us wrap it up. And yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
joining me. Thank you for taking out your time.
Yeah, and thank you so much
See you
for
soon.
having me on. So thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And the only thing I'll say is that for those out there who are interested in some of those practical ways of working, again, go check out things like the Atlassian Team Playbook. You can also go look at some of our research on the Atlassian State of Teams report. So these are things where we go and look at the world of work and we make predictions and we actually bring in real data from around the world. Like in our last State of Teams, it was 5,000 knowledge workers we talked to around the world that aren't necessarily Atlassian users to find out how they're working and what their issues are. A lot of fascinating things come out of there, but a lot of really good practical things you could try too. So go check that out and try to experiment out there. That's what I always encourage people to do.
Yeah. So for the audience, if you have a small startup or if you're running a global team, Atlassian has a holy grail of research when it comes to distributed work, how your teams can work effectively, synchronous and asynchronous. So go check it out. I'll share the details in the description as well.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Bye.